The courtroom smelled like old wood and fear. My son's laughter bounced off the marble walls like a taunt. My daughter-in-law wouldn't meet my eyes. They thought this was already over. They thought the trial was just a formality before they dismantled what was left of my life. Then the judge spoke my maiden name, the one I hadn't used in 50 years, and I watched my son's confidence crack like ice underweight. They dragged a widow into court. They had no idea they'd awakened something far more dangerous. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get to the story. Mrs. Smith, he said slowly, was your maiden name Daniels, by chance? Yes, Your Honor. His eyes widened. Theresa Daniels. My God. You taught me how to write my first motion. You were my supervisor in Albany. Brian's laughter died in his throat. Helen's face drained of color. They thought they were dragging a senile old widow into court to strip her of everything she owned. They had no idea they'd just walked into an ambush set by a woman they'd forgotten was once sharper than any lawyer they could afford. It started, as betrayals often do, with kindness I was too lonely to question. It was a Thursday evening, 3 months earlier. I was sitting in the converted guest house behind Brian and Helen's sprawling suburban fortress, a gleaming monument to the success my husband Walter and I had helped them build. The main house had 6 bedrooms, a theater room, and a kitchen island bigger than my entire living space. Inside, through the windows, I could see them. Helen was showing fabric swatches to an interior designer, gesturing dramatically at the walls. Brian paced near the fireplace, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and urgent even though I couldn't make out the words. We need to streamline Mom's accounts, I'd heard him say last week. It's too confusing for her. Let me handle it. He'd said it like he was doing me a favor. Like managing my money, my husband's life insurance, the bonds from the farm we'd sold, the savings we'd built across 50 years, was a burden he was graciously shouldering. I'd signed the papers he'd slid across the kitchen counter. Just a formality, Mom. Makes things easier if anything happens. I am Theresa Smith. I'm 70 years old. And for 2 years, I'd been letting my son turn easier into erased. After Walter died, I'd sold our small farm in upstate New York, the land we'd worked together, the house where we'd raised Brian, the garden Isabel had planted the year before the cancer took her. I couldn't bear to stay there alone, surrounded by ghosts. So when Brian suggested I move into their guest house, it seemed like providence. A way to stay close. A way to not disappear entirely. You'll be safer here, Mom, he'd said, squeezing my hand. We can take care of you. But taking care of me became something else entirely. First, Brian started deciding which doctor appointments were really necessary. Then Helen began managing my budget, complete with color-coded spreadsheets that somehow always showed me owing them money for groceries, utilities, the Wi-Fi I barely used. They stopped inviting me to family dinners. Instead, Helen would bring leftovers in aluminum foil containers, setting them on my porch like I was a stray cat. I told myself they were busy. That modern life made people cold, not cruel. That maybe I was asking too much, expecting too much, and remembering a version of my son who no longer existed. Until the day the man from the county clerk's office knocked on my guest house door. He was young, apologetic, holding a manila envelope like it might explode. Mrs. Smith? I'm sorry to have to serve you with this. I opened it with shaking hands. Legal letterhead. County Superior Court. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. The words blurred and sharpened, mentally unfit, erratic behavior, danger to herself financially, progressive cognitive decline. My son, had filed to have me declared incompetent. To take legal control of my mind, my money, my life. I read it 3 times. Then I walked to the main house and knocked on the kitchen door. Helen answered, wiping her hands on a towel. Mom. Is everything okay? I held up the papers. Did you know about this? Her eyes flickered to the envelope, then away. He's worried about you. We both are. You've been forgetting things, Anne. What things, Helen? She faltered. You know. Little things. You called me Rachel last month. Rachel is your middle name. I was asking if you still went by it. Silence. Where's Brian? I asked quietly. He's at a site visit. Mom, please don't be upset. This is for your own. I turned and walked back to the guest house. I didn't slam the door. I locked it. And then I sat at the small kitchen table, the one Walter and I had bought at an estate sale 40 years ago, and I did something I hadn't done since the day they lowered my husband into the ground. I opened the dusty box I'd shoved into the back of my closet. Inside were my old law journals. My bar association contacts. My notes from cases I'd helped shape when I was Theresa Daniels, one of the first female law clerks at the New York Supreme Court. Brian had forgotten who I was before I became his mother. But I hadn't. I read the petition 7 times that first night. Each time, the clinical language cut deeper. The respondent exhibits marked confusion regarding financial matters and frequently misplaces important documents. Family members report incidents of paranoid behavior, including accusations of theft and unwarranted suspicion. Medical evaluation confirms progressive cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia. They'd turned my grief into symptoms. My reasonable questions into paranoia. My age into a diagnosis. But by the 4th reading, something shifted. The sting began to dull, replaced by something sharper, more familiar. I stopped reading like a wounded mother and started reading like what I used to be. That's when I saw them. Small things. Legal errors that made my jaw tighten. The petition cited New York Mental Hygiene Law Section 81.03, but we were in California, had been for 3 years. The statute reference was wrong. The jurisdictional basis was flimsy at best. And there, on page 4, the name of my primary care physician, Dr. Robert Chenoweth. My doctor's name was Chenoweth. Robert Chenoweth. No competent attorney would misspell a treating physician's name on a guardianship petition. The document was either rushed, sloppy, or, and this made my pulse quicken, deliberately falsified. I set the papers down and walked to the window. Outside, the main house glowed like a stage set. Helen moved past a window, phone pressed to her ear. Brian's shadow crossed another room. They were celebrating something. Probably already counting money they thought was theirs. I turned back to the small table where the petition lay spread out like evidence at a crime scene. For the first time in years, I felt something I thought I'd buried with Walter. Purpose. The memories came back in pieces, sharp and vivid. I was 26 years old, the only woman in a wood-paneled chamber in Albany where old men decided the fate of the law. I'd been hired as a junior research clerk, a title that meant I did twice the work for half the recognition, but I was good. Better than good. I could read a brief and spot the weakness in 3 minutes. I could draft a counter-argument that turned a losing case into precedent. The judges knew it. So did the attorneys who submitted their work to chambers, men in expensive suits who never looked me in the eye but always thanked the team when they won. I'd written the foundation for People v. Garrett, a case that redefined fiduciary duty in New York. My name appeared nowhere on the opinion, but I'd drafted every word of the holding. Judge Morrison had called me into his office afterward, poured me a glass of scotch I didn't drink, and told me I had a mind that could reshape the law. You could be arguing cases before the Court of Appeals in 10 years, he'd said. 5, if you're ruthless. I'd believed him. Then I met Walter Price at a charity fundraiser. He was older, steady, a construction engineer who built things that lasted. He didn't talk over me. Didn't diminish me. He asked about my work and actually listened to the answers. We married within a year. I kept working, kept climbing. Then Brian was born. Walter never demanded I quit. He was too kind for that. But the late nights became impossible. The chambers required 60-hour weeks, and daycare closed at 6. something had to give. You can always go back, Walter had said, holding our infant son. When he's older. When things settle. I'd nodded, believing him. Believing myself. I'd packed my files into boxes and told Judge Morrison I needed to step back temporarily. He'd shaken my hand with something that looked like pity and said the law would be waiting when I was ready. But the law doesn't wait. It moves on. And by the time Brian started school, my contacts had retired, my networks had dissolved, and the idea of returning felt like trying to restart a career that had never really existed. So I became Walter's wife. Brian's mother. The woman who organized fundraisers and hosted dinners and made sure my husband's business had a foundation strong enough to build an empire. I'd buried Theresa Daniels so deep I'd almost convinced myself she'd never been real. Until tonight. I made coffee at midnight and spread the petition across the table alongside a legal pad I found in a drawer. Old habits surfaced like muscle memory. I started with the basics, jurisdiction, filing dates, procedural requirements. Then I moved to the substance. The medical evaluation. The financial claims. The witnesses. An hour in, I found the second crack. The petition claimed I'd made several large, unexplained withdrawals from my accounts in recent months. It listed 3 transactions, 8,000 in March, 8,000 in March, 8,000 in March, 12,000 in April, $15,000 in May. I pulled up my bank statements on the laptop Brian had helped me set up, which I suddenly realized meant he'd linked our accounts. The withdrawals existed. But the explanations were right there in the memo lines. March, property tax payment, annual. April, life insurance premium, Walter's policy, beneficiary, Brian. May, roof repair, main house. Every single withdrawal was documented, legitimate, and, most damningly, 2 of them had been for Brian's benefit. They weren't unexplained. They were inconvenient to his narrative. I kept digging. The petition referenced, concerned family members who'd witnessed my decline. Plural. But Brian was my only living child. Walter's brother had died in 2019. That left Helen, who'd married into the family 5 years ago. 2 people did not make family members. It made a conspiracy. Then I found the medical evaluation, attached as Exhibit C. Psychological assessment prepared by Vance Tully, Psy.D. Patient exhibits disorientation, memory lapses, and difficulty managing complex tasks. I read it twice, my coffee going cold. Dr. Tully wasn't my psychologist. I'd never heard his name. And the assessment was dated April 18th, a Thursday I specifically remembered spending at my book club, fully oriented and discussing the remains of the day with 7 witnesses. I opened a new browser tab and typed, Vance Tully Psychologist California License. The search results loaded. My breath caught. Dr. Vance Tully's license had been revoked in 2022 for insurance fraud and unlawful distribution of controlled substances. The California Board of Psychology had a disciplinary notice posted with his photo, a thin man with hollow eyes and a defensive smile. He couldn't legally practice. Couldn't evaluate patients. Couldn't sign a document that would hold up under even casual scrutiny. Which meant this evaluation was a forgery. And if the evaluation was forged, the entire petition was built on fraud. I sat back, my mind racing through implications. Brian wasn't just trying to take my money. He was committing a crime to do it. Elder abuse. Fraud. Possibly conspiracy. But why? Why risk everything? I pulled up my laptop again and did what I should have done months ago. I searched for Brian's company. Walsh and Price Construction LLC. The results were immediate and damning. Local firm faces bankruptcy amid fraud allegations, Los Angeles Business Journal, March 2025. Luxury condo project halted after investor lawsuit, Daily News, April 2025. Developer Brian Smith under investigation for misappropriation of funds, LA Times, May 2025. I clicked through article after article, my stomach sinking. Brian's signature development, the Dalton Ridge luxury condos, had collapsed. Investors were suing for $2.8 million. The project had been shut down by the city after inspectors found falsified permits and substandard materials. Brian was drowning. And I was the only lifeboat in reach. The farmland bonds Walter and I had purchased decades ago were still in my name, untouched, worth roughly $400,000. Add in the life insurance payout I'd been living off, my savings, and the equity in this guest house I technically still owned, and I represented liquid assets Brian desperately needed. If he became my legal guardian, he could liquidate everything. Pay off his debts. Save his company. All he had to do was convince a court his mother was too senile to stop him. I thought about the boy Brian used to be. He'd sit beside Walter on the porch of our old farmhouse, tiny hands gripping toy hammers while his father explained how foundations worked. You build from the ground up, son. Cut corners, and everything falls. Walter had taught him integrity. I'd taught him strategy. And he'd learned just enough of both to weaponize them against me. The betrayal should have broken me. Maybe it would have, a week ago. But sitting there at midnight, surrounded by evidence of my son's corruption, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. If Brian wanted to make me small, to erase me, to treat me like a problem to be managed, then he'd learn what Walter had tried to teach him all those years ago. Foundations matter. And I'd built mine in courtrooms where men twice his size had tried to bury me and failed. I stood, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled down the box I'd shoved onto the top shelf 2 years ago. Inside, my law journals from Albany. My notes on fiduciary duty, guardianship standards, evidentiary procedure. A Rolodex with names I hadn't called in decades, clerks, attorneys, judges who'd moved on to positions of power. And at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, my old bar association ID card. Theresa Daniels, ESQ. I ran my thumb over the faded photo. The woman staring back at me was young, fierce, uncompromising. She wasn't gone. She'd just been sleeping. I picked up my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found a name I'd saved but never called. Olivia Chen. My last mentor before I'd left Chambers. The brilliant researcher who'd sent me a Christmas card every year with updates on her career. The latest card, from December, had included a business card. Olivia Chen, Senior Investigator, California State Attorney's Office, Elder Abuse and Financial Crimes Division. I typed out a message. Olivia, it's Theresa Daniels. I need your help. And I think you're going to want to hear this. I hit send. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began drafting my response to Brian's petition. Not as a mother. As an attorney. Frank Mercer answered on the third ring, his voice gravelly with age and too many years of courthouse coffee. County Registrar's office is closed, sweetheart. Call back Monday. Frank, it's Theresa Daniels. Silence. Then a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. Theresa? That you really? It's really me. Thought you died, woman. Or went off to some retirement island. Nobody's heard from you in, what, 15 years? Closer to 20, I said. And I need a favor. Another pause. I could hear him settling into his chair, the creak of old leather. Frank had been a junior clerk when I worked Chambers, a kid who ran files and learned to spot inconsistencies by watching me work. Last I'd heard, he'd climbed to deputy registrar before retiring. But men like Frank never really retired, they just moved their operations home. What kind of favor are we talking about? The kind where you tell me what filings exist for Walsh and Price Construction LLC. And anything connected to Brian Smith personally. Your son Brian? My son Brian. Theresa. His tone shifted, careful now. You sure you want to go digging in that? My grip tightened on the phone. That bad? Worse. Hold on. I heard keys clicking, the hum of a computer fan. Frank muttered something under his breath. Okay. Walsh and Price Construction. Filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on March 3rd of this year. Creditors are circling, looks like $2.8 million owed to primary investors, another $1.3 million in contractor liens, plus a lawsuit from the city over the Dalton Ridge project. That one's ugly. Allegations of permit fraud, falsified inspection reports, misappropriation of investor funds. My stomach dropped. Criminal charges? Not yet. But the DA's office has an open investigation. Financial Crimes Division. He paused. There's more. Brian personally guaranteed about $900,000 in business loans. His house is leveraged to hell, second mortgage, home equity line maxed out. And there's a lien filed by the IRS for unpaid payroll taxes. $250,000, give or take. I closed my eyes. He's drowning. He's past drowning, Theresa. He's sinking. And from what I'm seeing, you're the only thing keeping him from the bottom. My assets. The farmland bonds in your name. The life insurance proceeds. Whatever savings you got left. If he can access those, legally, through guardianship, he might be able to restructure, pay down enough debt to avoid criminal charges. Frank's voice softened. He's trying to save himself by burying you. I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat very still, staring at the financial documents spread across my table, seeing them now through the lens of desperation rather than malice. Brian wasn't evil. He was terrified. Which somehow made it worse. I spent the next 3 hours doing what I should have done months ago, auditing my own accounts. The bank portal showed our finances had been simplified for convenience in February, right around the time Brian started visiting more often, offering to help with the confusing online stuff. My checking and savings were now under joint management authorization, which meant Brian could access everything. The farmland bonds were still solely in my name, for now, but there were notes in the system flagged for estate planning review. Then I found the payments. Starting in March, regular withdrawals. $1,200 to Tully and Associates Consulting. Another $800 to the same recipient in April. $1,500 in May. I searched for Tully and Associates. The results showed a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Van Nuys. No website. No phone listing. Just a business license filed 8 months ago by someone named V. Tully. My pulse quickened. I pulled up the forged psychological evaluation again, checked the signature. Vance Tully, Psy.D. The same Vance Tully whose license had been revoked for fraud. Someone had paid him nearly $4,000 over 3 months. The payments came from my account, but I'd never authorized them. Which meant I checked the transaction details. Each payment had been initiated through the online portal using Brian's login credentials, categorized as medical consulting. Helen's work. Had to be. Brian was too obvious for this kind of detail. He built things, broke things, made grand gestures. This was surgical. Careful. The kind of planning that required patience and access to systems most people ignored. I thought about Helen. How she'd volunteered to organize my medical records last year. How she'd insisted on coming to my appointments with Dr. Chenoweth, taking notes, asking questions. How she'd smiled through it all. I called Dr. Chenoweth's office first thing in the morning. Mrs. Smith, of course. What can I do for you? Did you write a diagnostic assessment for me? Something that would be filed with a court? Silence. Then, I'm sorry, what? A psychological or cognitive evaluation. Dated sometime in the last 6 months. Theresa, I'm your primary care physician, not a psychologist. I don't write those kinds of assessments. And I certainly haven't filed anything with any court. His tone shifted to concern. Has someone claimed I did? I told him about the petition. The forged evaluation. Dr. Chenoweth's voice went cold. That's fraud. Medical fraud and identity theft if they used my credentials. You need to report this. I will. But first I need to understand how they did it. I thanked him and hung up, my next move already forming. The clinic that had employed Vance Tully before his license was revoked was a small operation in Glendale called Westside Behavioral Health. According to the state board's disciplinary records, Tully had worked there from 2018 until his termination in 2022. I drove there under the pretense of inquiring about anxiety treatment for a friend. The receptionist, a tired woman in her 50s, barely looked up when I entered. Do you still have records for former practitioners? I asked. I was referred by someone who used to see a Dr. Tully here. Her expression soured. Dr. Tully hasn't worked here in 3 years. Lost his license. Oh, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I leaned in, lowering my voice conspiratorially. The person who referred me was very insistent. Said Dr. Tully helped her tremendously. Helen Smith? Maybe you remember her? The receptionist's face changed. Recognition, then something sharper. Helen Smith worked here. She wasn't a patient. My blood went cold. Worked here? HR coordinator. Handled personnel files, licensing paperwork, that kind of thing. The woman's eyes narrowed. She left around the same time Dr. Tully did. Why are you really asking? I made an excuse and left quickly, my hands shaking as I reached my car. Helen hadn't just found Vance Tully. She'd worked alongside him. Had access to his credentials, his signature, and his paperwork. She'd built the forgery from the inside. I sat in the parking lot, engine running, piecing it together. Helen met Brian 5 years ago at some charity function. Young, ambitious, beautiful. He was still riding high on his father's reputation, the golden boy developer with the famous last name. She must have seen the cracks early. The overextension. The risky investments. The ego that made Brian borrow against tomorrow to impress people today. And when it all started crumbling, when the debts piled up and the lawsuits began, she didn't leave. She built him a lifeboat out of my life. The joint bank access. The forged medical evaluation. The payments to Tully and Associates, probably kickbacks for lending his revoked credentials to a fraudulent assessment. Helen had orchestrated all of it. Not as Brian's helpless accomplice, but as the architect. And Brian, desperate and drowning, had let her. That night, I sat at my table with all the evidence laid out like a prosecutor's case file. Bank statements showing unauthorized payments. The forged psychological evaluation signed by a doctor who couldn't legally practice. Frank's records proving Brian's financial collapse. Dr. Chenoweth's confirmation that he'd never written the diagnostic claims attributed to him. County records showing Helen's employment at the clinic where Vance Tully had worked. It was damning. Comprehensive. The kind of evidence that could destroy them both. I thought about Brian as a child, building block towers beside his father. Walter's patience as he taught our son that shortcuts led to collapse. I thought about Helen's smile at family dinners, her hand on Brian's shoulder, her voice so concerned when she suggested I might need help managing things. And I thought about myself, the woman I'd buried 20 years ago, the attorney who'd reshaped law in rooms where powerful men tried to diminish her. That woman wouldn't cry. She'd calculate. I picked up my phone and opened the message I'd sent to Olivia Chen. She'd responded an hour ago. Theresa. So good to hear from you. I'm in LA this week. Coffee tomorrow? I have a feeling this is going to be interesting. I typed back. Tomorrow. 10 a.m. And bring your case recorder. You're going to want documentation. Then I opened a new document and began drafting what would become my counterpetition. Not as a victim. As an attorney representing a client who'd been systematically defrauded by her own family. Outside, lights glowed in the main house. Brian and Helen, probably planning their next move, confident in their trajectory. They had no idea the foundation was already crumbling beneath them. And I'd learned from the best. Walter always said the collapse happens slowly, then all at once. I intended to make sure they felt every single crack. Olivia Chen arrived exactly on time, which told me everything I needed to know about the woman she'd become. I'd chosen a coffee shop 3 miles from Brian's house, far enough to avoid his usual haunts, public enough to seem innocent if anyone asked. She walked in wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a leather portfolio that had seen real use, not the decorative kind people bought to look important. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes were sharper. Mrs. Smith. God, it's been too long. Theresa, please. I stopped being the Mrs. Anything the day I realized formality was just another cage. I gestured to the table. Thank you for coming. Are you kidding? When Theresa Daniels calls after 20 years, you don't say no. She sat, pulling out a slim recording device and setting it on the table between us. Do you mind? I'd be disappointed if you didn't. A smile flickered across her face, recognition of the woman I used to be, still alive beneath the years. So, Olivia said, opening her portfolio. Your message said you needed help. Elder abuse context. Walk me through it. I expected to feel shame telling the story. Instead, I felt relief. I laid out everything. The guardianship petition. Brian's financial collapse. The forged psychological evaluation from a doctor whose license had been revoked. Helen's employment history at the clinic. The unauthorized bank transfers to Tully and Associates. Olivia's pen moved steadily across her notepad, but her expression never changed. No pity. No shock. Just the cold assessment of someone cataloging evidence. When I finished, she looked up. Mrs. Smith, sorry, Theresa, if they filed a petition using falsified medical records, that's not a family dispute. That's elder fraud under California Welfare and Institutions Code 15610.30. That's a felony. Potentially multiple felonies depending on the financial component. She tapped her pen against the table. This isn't a family matter anymore. This is a criminal case waiting to happen. Can you prove it? Can you? I slid the folder across the table. Inside, copies of everything. The petition with the misspelled doctor's name. Frank's bankruptcy filings. The bank statements showing payments to Tully and Associates. Dr. Chenoweth's written statement denying he'd authored any cognitive assessment. The state board's disciplinary record for Vance Tully. Olivia went through each document methodically, her expression hardening with each page. Jesus Christ, she muttered. They weren't even careful. Look at this, she pointed to the psychological evaluation. The letterhead's wrong. Westside Behavioral Health changed their logo in 2021. This is using the old one. Either Tully's working off outdated materials or Helen created it from archived files when she worked there. Most likely. Olivia sat back, arms crossed. Okay. Here's what we're dealing with. Your son is facing financial ruin. His wife, who has administrative access to medical records and a relationship with a disgraced psychologist, manufactures evidence of your incompetence. They file for guardianship to access your assets, specifically the farmland bonds that could pull him out of bankruptcy. That's the theory. It's not a theory, Theresa. It's a conspiracy. And a sloppy one. She leaned forward. Which gives us leverage. But we need to be smart about this. If we expose everything now, they'll lawyer up, claim ignorance, maybe pin everything on Tully as a rogue actor. We need them confident. Comfortable. We need them to keep talking. You want me to play along? I want you to let them tie the rope. We'll just hand them the hook. The plan took shape over 2 hours and 3 cups of coffee. Olivia would open a formal investigation through the Elder Abuse and Financial Crimes Division, quietly, without alerting Brian or Helen. Meanwhile, I would continue to appear compliant. Confused, even. Let them think the guardianship was inevitable. The hearing's in 3 weeks, I said. That's not much time. It's enough. Here's what I need from you. Olivia pulled out a checklist. First, I need you to document everything. Every conversation with Brian or Helen. Record them if California law allows, and it does, as long as one party consents. That's you. What am I listening for? Coercion. Intimidation. Anything that shows they're manipulating you into surrendering your rights. They think you're helpless, so they'll get arrogant. People like that always do. What else? Access to Helen's communications. Emails, texts, anything connecting her to Vance Tully or anyone associated with that clinic. If she used your joint accounts to pay Tully, there's a digital trail. We need to follow it. I nodded. I can access the bank portal. Brian doesn't know I kept my login credentials. Perfect. Download everything, statements, transaction details, memos. Look for patterns. If Helen's been siphoning money or making payments that align with this fraud, we need proof. And Brian? Olivia's expression hardened. Brian's already exposed through the bankruptcy filings. But we need him on record admitting the guardianship is about money, not your welfare. Can you get him to say that? If I push the right buttons. Then push them. Make him angry. Desperate people say the truth when they think they've already won. I started that afternoon. Brian came to the guest house unannounced, already a power move, treating my space like an extension of his property. He found me at the kitchen table, the guardianship petition open in front of me like I'd been struggling to understand it. Mom. Hey. He kissed my forehead, the gesture so automatic it made my skin crawl. You okay? You seem stressed. I'm trying to read this. I gestured weakly at the papers. But it's so complicated. All this legal language. That's why you need help, Mom. That's the whole point. He sat across from me, his tone gentle. Patronizing. The court just wants to make sure someone's looking out for you. Making sure your finances are managed properly. I let my voice shake. But it says you'd have control over my accounts. My bonds. Everything Dad and I saved. Only to protect it. To make sure nobody takes advantage of you. Who would take advantage of me? Brian's jaw tightened, just a flicker, but I saw it. You know how it is, Mom. Scammers target seniors. You've been forgetful lately. Making mistakes. What mistakes? The bills you forgot to pay. The checkbook you lost. Doctor's appointments you missed. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. We're worried about you. I pulled the recording device from my pocket, disguised as a hearing aid case, and set it on the table. What's that? Brian asked. My hearing aid case. Dr. Chenoweth said I should keep it close. I've been misplacing things, remember? He relaxed. Nodded. See? That's exactly what I mean. Brian. I let tears well up. Real ones weren't hard to find. Is this really about helping me? Or is it about your company? His expression froze. Mom, I don't. Frank Mercer called me. From the county office. He said your business is in trouble. Bankruptcy. Lawsuits. I watched his face pale. He said you need money. Brian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Frank had no right, that's confidential. Is it true? It's complicated. Is it true that if you become my guardian, you can access my farmland bonds? Silence. Then Brian's mask slipped. Just for a moment, but it was enough. Mom, those bonds are sitting there doing nothing. You don't need them. But I do. The business can be saved if I can restructure the debt, pay off the right people. You want to help me, don't you? After everything Dad and I built? Everything Dad built, I corrected quietly. What? Dad built the company. You inherited it. There's a difference. Brian's hands clenched. You don't understand business, Mom. You never did. Dad made the money, but he didn't understand leverage, risk, expansion. I took what he built and turned it into something bigger. And then you broke it. His face went red. I made one bad investment. One project that went sideways because the city changed the regulations mid-construction. That's not failure, that's bad luck. And if the family, would just support me instead of questioning everything, I could fix this. By taking my money. By protecting our legacy. The words hung in the air. I let the silence stretch, watching him realize what he'd said. How it sounded. Mom, I didn't mean. I think you should go, Brian. Mom. Please. He left, slamming the door behind him. I picked up the recording device and stopped the recording. 90 seconds of pure, unfiltered admission. I sent the file to Olivia with a single word, hook. She replied immediately, perfect. Keep going. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I barely recognized. In public, I played the role Brian needed, confused, frail, dependent. At family dinners, I asked the same questions twice. Let Helen help me with my phone. Nodded along when Brian explained financial concepts I'd understood since law school. But in private, I was building a case. I recorded Helen on the phone with someone she called V, discussing, finalizing the documentation, and making sure everything's airtight for the hearing. I accessed the bank portal and downloaded every transaction, highlighting payments to Tully and Associates and cross-referencing them with dates Helen had visited the guest house. I even reached out to old contacts, attorneys who'd retired but still had connections, clerks who owed me favors from decades ago. People who could testify to my competence, my legal acumen, the fact that the woman Brian described in his petition bore no resemblance to reality. And I watched as Brian's desperation escalated. He started bringing people to the house, friends, business associates, distant relatives, parading them past me like witnesses to my decline. At a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard him telling someone I'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store. I hadn't driven anywhere in weeks. Helen was more subtle. She spread concern through whispers. Worried comments about my confusion. Sad smiles when people asked how I was doing. She was building a narrative, brick by brick, and I let her. Because Olivia was building something bigger. 3 days before the hearing, Brian held a family meeting. He'd invited cousins I hadn't seen in years, neighbors who barely knew me, even his accountant. 20 people crammed into the main house living room, sitting on couches and folding chairs, all looking uncomfortable. I sat in the corner, wearing a cardigan and a carefully blank expression. Brian stood at the front like he was giving a presentation. I want to thank everyone for coming. I know this is awkward, but it's important we're all on the same page about Mom's situation. He glanced at me with what he probably thought was compassion. She's not doing well. Cognitively, I mean. The doctors have confirmed early-stage dementia, and her ability to manage her own affairs has deteriorated significantly. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the room. The guardianship hearing is Friday. It's a formality, really. Just making official what we all know needs to happen. I'll be taking over her financial management, medical decisions, day-to-day care. It's for her own protection. Helen stood beside him, nodding solemnly. One of my cousins, Linda, a retired teacher, raised her hand tentatively. Have you considered other options? Like a power of attorney? Something less restrictive? Brian's smile tightened. We tried. Mom refused to sign. She doesn't understand what's at stake. I understand perfectly, I said quietly. The room went silent. Brian turned. Mom, we've talked about this. You talked. I listened. I stood slowly, letting them see how steady I was. And now I'm telling you, I will not sign over my rights. Not to you. Not to anyone. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years, Brian. His face darkened. Helen touched his arm, a warning, but he shook her off. Everyone here can see you're not yourself. The forgetfulness. The paranoia. You accused Helen of stealing from you last month. Did I? I tilted my head. Or did I notice unauthorized transactions from my account to a shell company called Tully and Associates? The color drained from Helen's face. Those were medical consultations, Brian stammered. From a psychologist whose license was revoked 3 years ago. Silence. Linda stood. Theresa, what are you talking about? Ask Brian about Vance Tully. Ask Helen about her time at Westside Behavioral Health. Ask them both how a forged psychological evaluation ended up as the centerpiece of a guardianship petition. Brian stepped forward. You're confused, Mom. You're mixing things up. Then explain it to me. Explain why payments to Dr. Tully started the same month you filed for bankruptcy. Explain why my primary physician has no record of writing the diagnostic report submitted to the court. Explain why you need guardianship over a woman who just quoted Welfare and Institutions Code 15610.30 from memory. No one spoke. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Brian demanded. To see my attorney. You don't have an attorney. I paused at the threshold, looking back at my son, this man I'd raised, this stranger I barely recognized. I am an attorney, Brian. I was an attorney before you were born. And on Friday, you're going to remember exactly what that means. I left them staring. Outside, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Olivia. Make sure he gets exactly what he asked for. Her reply came immediately. Understood. Bring your navy suit. When I walked into the courtroom that Friday morning, I wore my navy suit, the one I'd kept in the back of my closet for 20 years, still crisp, still perfectly tailored. I carried a leather briefcase Walter had given me on our 10th anniversary, its brass clasps worn smooth by decades of use. Brian sat at the petitioner's table with his attorney, Blake Danner, a slick corporate lawyer who specialized in probate disputes. They were reviewing documents, confident in their prepared narrative. Helen sat in the gallery behind them, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. When Brian saw me, he actually smirked. Mom, you didn't have to dress up. This is just a formality. I didn't respond. I walked past him to the respondent's table and set down my briefcase with a deliberate click that echoed through the nearly empty courtroom. The bailiff called for everyone to rise. The Honorable Judge Marcus Reeves presiding. The judge entered from his chambers, black robes flowing, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the case file. He was younger than I expected for a superior court judge, mid-50s, graying at the temples, with the sharp posture of someone who'd climbed through the ranks quickly. He settled into his chair and looked up. Our eyes met. His expression froze. The file slipped slightly in his hands before he caught it, his knuckles white against the paper. Theresa Daniels? His voice carried a note I couldn't quite place. Disbelief, perhaps. Or recognition. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Reeves removed his glasses slowly, cleaning them with unnecessary precision. When he spoke again, his tone was careful, measured. Counselor Daniels. I wasn't expecting to see you in my courtroom. Brian's head snapped up. Counselor? The judge ignored him. Ms. Daniels, are you representing yourself in this matter? For the moment, Your Honor. Though I believe additional counsel will be joining us shortly. I see. Judge Reeves glanced at Brian's attorney. Mr. Danner, you filed this petition for guardianship. Were you aware of Ms. Daniels' professional background? Danner looked confused. I'm sorry, Your Honor, but the petition clearly states the respondent is. I'm aware of what the petition states, Counselor. I'm asking if you knew that Theresa Daniels spent 32 years as a trial attorney and appellate consultant. That she worked directly on guardianship reform legislation in New York in the 1990s. That she, he paused, something like admiration crossing his face, quite literally wrote portions of the statutes we use to evaluate competency in these proceedings. The color drained from Danner's face. Brian stood halfway out of his chair. What? No, Mom never practiced law. She was just a what, Mr. Smith? Judge Reeves's tone could have frozen water. Brian sat down hard. The judge turned to me. Ms. Daniels, before we proceed, I should disclose for the record that I clerked under Judge Harriet Morrison in Albany during my second year. Judge Morrison spoke of you often. She considered you one of the finest legal minds she'd encountered. Judge Morrison was generous, I said quietly. She was precise. He glanced at the petition before him, then at Brian. Which makes this filing all the more concerning. The proceedings began with Blake Danner presenting his case. He was smooth, I'd give him that. He laid out a narrative of cognitive decline supported by what he called extensive medical documentation. He referenced missed appointments, financial confusion, forgetfulness. Your Honor, the evidence clearly demonstrates that Ms. Daniels, despite her impressive former career, is no longer capable of managing her own affairs. Her primary care physician, Dr. Paul Chenoweth, has documented significant memory impairment. Additionally, a comprehensive psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Vance Tully confirms early-stage dementia with associated executive function deficits. He slid the forged evaluation across the bench. Judge Reeves read it without expression. Mr. Danner, this evaluation is dated April 15th of this year. Do you have Dr. Tully present to testify? He was unable to attend, Your Honor, but his written assessment speaks for itself. Does it? The judge set the document down. And Dr. Chenoweth? Is he available? He submitted a written statement supporting the petition. Did he? Judge Reeves made a note. We'll return to that. Continue. Danner proceeded to paint a picture of a woman lost in confusion, a son desperately trying to protect his mother from herself. He cited Brian's deep concern and family obligation. He mentioned the farmland bonds almost in passing, as if they were incidental to the matter at hand. Helen watched from the gallery, her face pale, her hands twisting in her lap. When Danner finished, Judge Reeves looked at me. Ms. Daniels, do you wish to respond? I do, Your Honor. But I believe we're waiting for. The courtroom doors opened. Olivia Chin walked in carrying 2 file boxes and a leather portfolio. Behind her came a man I didn't recognize, late 40s, stern expression, wearing an FBI credentials badge clipped to his belt. Your Honor, Olivia said, I apologize for the delay. Olivia Chin, senior investigator with the Elder Abuse and Financial Crimes Division, California Department of Justice. I'm here to submit evidence relevant to this proceeding, along with Special Agent Thomas Garrett from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White Collar Crimes Unit. Judge Reeves leaned forward. FBI involvement? Yes, Your Honor. This case touches on wire fraud, identity theft, and financial exploitation of an elder, all federal offenses. We've been conducting a parallel investigation for the past 2 weeks. Brian shot to his feet. This is insane. You can't just. Mr. Smith, sit down. The judge's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. Brian sat. Olivia approached the bench and handed Judge Reeves a sealed envelope. Your Honor, this contains documentation that we believe fundamentally undermines the petitioner's claims. With your permission, I'd like to present it as evidence. Objection. Danner stood quickly. Your Honor, we weren't notified of any counterfiling or. Mr. Danner, I'm going to allow it. Given the serious nature of the allegations I'm seeing in this preliminary summary, he tapped the envelope. I believe the court needs full transparency before making any determinations about Ms. Daniels' capacity. He opened the envelope. What followed was the longest 3 minutes of silence I'd ever experienced in a courtroom. Judge Reeves read page after page, his expression darkening with each sheet. Finally, he looked up. Ms. Chen, you're telling me that Dr. Vance Tully, whose psychological evaluation forms the basis of this guardianship petition, had his license revoked by the California Board of Psychology in 2022? Correct, Your Honor. For insurance fraud and illegal distribution of controlled substances. He cannot legally practice or conduct evaluations in this state. And the evaluation submitted today was fabricated? We believe so. The letterhead uses an outdated logo from Westside Behavioral Health, where Dr. Tully worked before his termination. Additionally, Mrs. Helen Smith, the petitioner's wife, was employed as an HR coordinator at that same clinic during Dr. Tully's tenure. She had access to his credentials, signature samples, and archived materials. Judge Reeves turned to Brian's table. Mrs. Smith is present? Helen stood shakily from the gallery. Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Smith, did you have contact with Dr. Vance Tully regarding your mother-in-law's evaluation? I don't. Answer the question. Helen's voice broke. I consulted with him. For advice. For advice, the judge repeated. Ms. Chen, what else do you have? Olivia pulled out a bound document. Bank records showing payments totaling $3,500 from Theresa's account to Tully and Associates, a shell company registered to Dr. Tully's post office box. These payments were initiated through the online banking portal using Brian Smith's login credentials without Theresa's knowledge or authorization. She produced another document. Email correspondence between Helen Smith and Vance Tully discussing documentation needs and evaluation formatting. The emails reference specific language to include in the psychological assessment, language that appears verbatim in the evaluation submitted to this court. Judge Reeves set down the papers and looked at Brian. Mr. Smith, stand up. Brian rose slowly, his face ashen. You filed a petition claiming your mother is mentally incompetent, using a forged medical evaluation from a disgraced psychologist, paid for with your mother's own money, while you were personally facing bankruptcy and criminal investigation for business fraud. Is that an accurate summary? Your Honor, I was trying to help. Answer yes or no. Brian's jaw clenched. The situation is more complicated than. Yes or no, Mr. Smith. Silence. Then, quietly, yes. The courtroom erupted. Judge Reeves slammed his gavel. Order. Everyone not directly involved in this case, clear the gallery. Now. People scrambled for the exits. Within 30 seconds, only the attorneys, investigators, Brian, Helen, and I remained. The judge waited until the doors closed. Mr. Smith, I want you to understand something very clearly. Your mother didn't just practice law. She pioneered the framework California uses to protect vulnerable adults from exactly what you attempted here. In 1996, she co-authored the legislative analysis that became the foundation for our current guardianship statutes. She argued before appellate courts to strengthen protections against financial exploitation of the elderly. He picked up the forged evaluation. You called her unfit to manage her own affairs. She wrote the legal definition of that term. You claimed she lacked capacity. She helped establish the evidentiary standards for proving it. You thought she was too confused to fight back. Judge Reeves looked at me, and I saw something like vindication in his eyes. You fundamentally misunderstood who you were dealing with. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. The judge turned to Olivia. Ms. Chen, what charges are pending? Elder financial abuse under Welfare and Institutions Code 15610.30. Wire fraud. Forgery. Conspiracy to commit fraud. We're also investigating potential medical aid fraud if any insurance claims were filed using the false diagnosis. And we have an active warrant for Vance Tully's arrest. And Mrs. Helen Smith? Helen made a small, broken sound. Olivia's expression didn't change. She's a cooperating witness at this time. Whether that continues depends on her level of candor moving forward. Judge Reeves nodded slowly. Then he picked up his gavel. The petition for guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I'm issuing a protective order prohibiting Brian Smith and Helen Smith from accessing, managing, or making any claims against Theresa Smith's financial accounts, real property, or personal assets. Violation of this order will result in immediate contempt charges. He looked at Brian. Mr. Smith, you're fortunate your mother is more forgiving than I am. Because if this were my case to prosecute rather than adjudicate, you'd already be in custody. Ms. Chen, I trust the state will handle this appropriately? Yes, Your Honor. Good. He turned to me. Mrs. Theresa, on behalf of this court, I apologize for the indignity of these proceedings. Your reputation speaks for itself, and nothing in this petition came close to diminishing it. Thank you, Your Honor. He stood, gathering his robes. Court is adjourned. Mr. Smith, I suggest you retain criminal counsel. You're going to need it. The gavel fell one final time. In the hallway outside, Brian sat on a bench with his head in his hands. Helen stood against the wall, crying silently. I walked past them both without stopping. Olivia caught up with me near the elevators. You okay? Better than okay. I pressed the call button. What happens now? Grand jury convenes next month. I'll need you to testify, walk them through the financial trail, the forged documents, all of it. After that, it's up to the DA. Will he go to prison? Olivia hesitated. Depends on what he pleads to. First-time offender, family circumstances, possible restitution agreement, he might avoid jail time. But his business is done. His reputation is done. And he'll be on probation for years. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. Theresa. Olivia held the door. For what it's worth, watching you in there was like watching a master class. You didn't just win. You reminded everyone what winning looks like. I smiled. I learned from the best. And then I became better. The doors closed. As the elevator descended, I caught my reflection in the polished steel walls. Navy suit. Steel spine. The woman I'd been before grief buried her. Walter would have been proud. More importantly, I was proud. And that, I realized, was enough. The courthouse hallway had nearly emptied when I asked Olivia to wait. There's one more thing, I said. She glanced back toward the courtroom. Theresa, you won. Completely. What else? Just trust me. We returned to find Judge Reeves still at the bench, reviewing notes. Brian sat slumped at his table, Danner beside him whispering urgently. Helen had vanished, probably to the restroom to compose herself. Your Honor, I said from the doorway. May I approach? Judge Reeves looked up, surprised. Ms. Daniels. I thought you'd left. Nearly. But there's additional documentation relevant to the financial component of this case. It affects the court's understanding of Mr. Smith's motivations. Brian's head jerked up. The judge gestured me forward. Proceed. I opened my briefcase and withdrew a folder I'd kept separate from Olivia's evidence files. Inside were 3 documents, a debt assignment agreement, a notarized deed transfer, and a letter from Dalton Ridge Capital Management. I handed them to Judge Reeves. He read in silence. Then read again. Finally, he looked at me over his reading glasses. Ms. Daniels, is this what I think it is? Yes, Your Honor. 3 weeks ago, I purchased Brian Smith's outstanding business debt from his primary creditor, Dalton Ridge Capital Management. The total sum was $847,000, which I paid using funds from my farmland bond portfolio, the same bonds Brian sought to access through this guardianship petition. Brian stood so fast his chair tipped backward. You did what? I didn't look at him. As of September 30th, I am your sole creditor, Brian. Dalton Ridge was preparing to foreclose on your company assets and file criminal charges for fraud. I offered them full payment in exchange for assignment of your debt. You can't. I can, and I did. The transaction is legal and binding. I turned to him finally. You wanted my money, son. Now you have it. Along with the consequences. His face went crimson. This is insane. You're using my own inheritance against me. Your inheritance? My voice was quiet, but it cut through his anger like glass. Walter built that portfolio over 40 years. He saved, invested, and protected those assets so I would be secure. Not so his son could squander them on vanity projects and failed developments. He would have wanted me to have them. To save the company. He would have wanted you to earn them. To prove you deserved them. I stepped closer. You didn't. So I'm putting them to better use. Judge Reeves cleared his throat. Ms. Daniels, what are the terms of this debt assignment? I pulled out another document, typed, formal, bearing my signature and a notary seal. Brian will repay the debt at 3% annual interest over 15 years. Monthly installments of $6,200, starting November 1st. If he defaults, I have the right to seize his remaining business assets, including the Dalton Ridge property, his equipment, and his accounts receivable. That's extortion. Brian shouted. That's a loan agreement, I corrected. Significantly more generous than what Dalton Ridge offered. They wanted the full sum immediately, plus legal fees, plus criminal prosecution for the fraudulent insurance claims you filed last year. I'm giving you a path forward. Whether you take it is your choice. Danner leaned toward Brian, whispering urgently. Brian shook his head, face twisted with fury and disbelief. Judge Reeves set down the documents. Mr. Smith, for the record, this is a private financial matter between you and your mother. It's not within this court's jurisdiction unless you're alleging some form of coercion or... Of course it's coercion. I'm offering you exactly what you tried to steal from me, I said evenly. Access to my assets. Under my terms. You won't get eviction papers, Brian. You'll get instructions. Follow them, and you'll survive this. Ignore them, and you'll lose everything. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Reeves closed the folder and slid it across the bench toward me. Ms. Daniels, I believe your business here is concluded. Mr. Smith, you're free to consult with your attorney about your options, though I suspect they're limited. I took the folder and turned toward the exit. Brian's voice stopped me. Why are you doing this? I looked back at him, this man who'd carried my groceries as a child, who'd built me birdhouses in the garage, who'd once cried in my arms after his first heartbreak. Because you're still my son, I said quietly. And because someone has to teach you that actions have consequences. Your father would have done it with patience and time. I don't have that luxury anymore. So I'm doing it the only way you'll understand. By destroying me? By holding you accountable. There's a difference. I walked out. The fallout was immediate and severe. Within a week, Brian's company formally dissolved. The Dalton Ridge project was sold to a competitor at a loss. 3 lawsuits from subcontractors were settled using Brian's remaining assets. Helen's name appeared in the local newspaper, not in the society pages where she'd always imagined herself, but in the crime blotter, Helen Marie Smith, 46, charged with conspiracy to commit elder fraud and forgery. She took a plea agreement. 2 years probation, 500 hours community service, restitution to cover the state's investigation costs. No jail time, but her nursing credentials were suspended pending a disciplinary review. Brian faced federal charges. Wire fraud. Financial exploitation. Conspiracy. His attorney negotiated aggressively, arguing first-time offender status and family duress. The prosecution pushed for prison time. In the end, he received 5 years probation, a $50,000 fine, and mandatory restitution payments. And, of course, the debt to me. I sent the first payment notice on November 1st. It arrived certified mail, along with a copy of the repayment schedule and a brief note. Your first installment is due November 30th, wire transfer instructions are enclosed. Please confirm receipt. TD. He paid on time. He's paid every month since. We haven't spoken. 6 months after the hearing, I drove to the Westside Community Center where Helen was completing her service hours. She worked in the senior activity room, helping elderly residents with art projects and recreational activities, a cruel irony not lost on anyone involved. I didn't announce myself. I simply sat in the observation area and watched her through the glass partition. She looked smaller somehow. Diminished. Her hair had gone gray at the roots, she'd stopped dyeing it, or perhaps couldn't afford to anymore. She moved carefully among the seniors, her hands gentle as she helped an elderly woman paint a ceramic pot. One of the residents said something that made Helen smile. It was brief, fragile, but genuine. I watched for 20 minutes, then left without approaching her. Some conversations didn't need words. I met with Olivia at a cafe downtown to discuss the recovered funds. After Brian's restitution payments and legal fees, you're looking at roughly $780,000 in liquid assets, she said, sliding a financial summary across the table. Plus the farmland bonds, your primary residence, and the guesthouse property. You're in excellent shape. I want to redirect some of it. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Redirect how? I'd been thinking about this for months. Planning it. Refining it until it felt right. Establish a scholarship fund. Women entering law school who are career changers, second chances, late bloomers, people who thought their time had passed. Full tuition, books, living stipend for the first year. That's generous. It's necessary. I lost 20 years because I believed I was done. Someone told me I was obsolete, and I listened. I don't want anyone else to make that mistake. How much are you thinking? $200,000 to start. Managed through a foundation so it's sustainable. Income-based awards, no age restrictions. Call it the Walter Daniels Memorial Scholarship. Olivia smiled. He'd like that. He would. I paused. The other thing, I want to donate to the Elder Abuse Legal Defense Fund. 6 figures. Anonymous if possible. It's possible. Any particular reason? Because what happened to me happens to thousands of people every year. Most of them don't have my background or resources. They can't fight back. Someone should. Olivia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You're not just balancing the ledger, Theresa. You're rewriting it. That's the goal. That evening, I sat in the guesthouse living room with my journal open on my lap. I'd started keeping it again after the trial, not as therapy, but as documentation. A record of what I'd learned, who I'd become, what mattered. I turned to a fresh page and wrote. Doubt is their weapon. It creeps in quietly, disguised as concern or care. They tell you you're forgetting, failing, fading. They repeat it until you start to believe them. But truth, well-timed, is mine. Not wielded as revenge, but revealed as fact. Not shouted, but spoken clearly when silence would cost too much. I spent 20 years in silence. I will not spend another day. I closed the notebook and set it aside, looking out at the garden Walter had planted. The roses were blooming again, late autumn blooms, fragile but persistent. My phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. Scholarship fund is official. First recipient selected. 52-year-old former paralegal returning to law school after raising 3 kids. She starts in January. I smiled and typed back. Perfect. Send me her information. I'd like to send a note. Will do. Proud of you, Theresa. Proud of us both. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that morning. The morning Brian walked into the guest house and told me about the guardianship petition. The morning he laughed, that particular sound, equal parts pity and triumph, as he explained how the court would assign him control over my life. He thought he was ending me. He didn't realize he was releasing me. Releasing me from the quiet grief that had become a cage. From the belief that my usefulness had expired with Walter's death. From the assumption that age meant irrelevance, that retirement meant surrender. He wanted to take everything I had. Instead, he reminded me who I was. A lawyer. A strategist. A woman who'd spent 30 years learning exactly how systems worked, and how to make them work for justice. I didn't destroy Brian. I held him accountable. There's a difference, though I'm not sure he understands it yet. Maybe someday he will. Maybe someday he'll look at that monthly payment and understand it's not punishment, it's a gift. A chance to rebuild honestly, to earn back what he tried to steal, to become someone his father would recognize. Or maybe he won't. Either way, I've done what I can. The ledger is balanced. And I am free. I stood and walked to the window, watching dawn break over the San Fernando Valley. The light was soft, golden, full of promise. Somewhere in that city, a 52-year-old woman was preparing to start law school. Somewhere else, an elderly person was getting legal help they couldn't afford. And somewhere, though I tried not to think about it too often, my son was waking up to face the consequences of his choices. All of it connected. All of it necessary. I picked up my coffee mug and raised it slightly toward the window. To Walter, I whispered. Who believed I was stronger than I knew? Then I corrected myself. To me. Who proved him right? Outside, the roses bloomed. Inside, I was finally home.